It was the winter of 1955, and somewhere in the frozen wilderness outside Anchorage, Alaska, men in heavy coats were quietly digging into the permafrost under orders they were not allowed to discuss with their families. The ground was hard as iron, the temperatures brutal enough to crack steel, and yet the work never stopped. Not for weather, not for holidays, not for anything. Above ground, the installations looked like ordinary military depots. Squat concrete buildings half buried in snow, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, unmarked roads that peeled off the highway and disappeared into stands of spruce. To anyone driving past on the Glen Highway, there was nothing remarkable about them at all. That was precisely the point. What those buildings concealed was not ordinary. Beneath the frozen surface of Alaska, arrayed in a ring around one of America's most strategically vital cities, the United States Army had begun constructing a network of nuclear missile launch sites, facilities loaded with warheads carrying the destructive power to level entire cities. Pointed skyward, fingers on a hair trigger, waiting for Soviet bombers that intelligence analysts were convinced would come. Not if, when. Documents declassified as recently as 2024 have revealed the full psychological weight pressed down on the men who operated these sites daily, the catastrophic near misses that were buried for decades, and the haunting fate of facilities that still sit in the Alaskan wilderness today, silent, rusting, and in some cases completely unacknowledged by any official record. This is not simply a story about missiles. This is a story about a nation so terrified of annihilation that it built the instruments of nuclear war directly beneath its own citizens, and then spent 50 years pretending it never happened. The threat that justified all of it was not abstract. By 1949, the Soviet Union had detonated its first atomic bomb, shattering the American assumption that it alone held the keys to nuclear fire. American war planners were suddenly faced with the terrifying geographic reality that most citizens had never fully absorbed. Alaska was not remote protection. Alaska was a front line, separated from the Soviet Far East by only 55 miles of open water at the Bering Strait. The territory, it would not become a state until 1959, was the closest American soil to Soviet bomber bases in Siberia. Tupolev Tu-4 aircraft, Soviet copies of the American B-29, could already make the crossing, and the newer Tu-95 Bear, a swept-wing turboprop monster capable of carrying thermonuclear payloads, was coming. Intelligence reports flowing into Washington in the early 1950s described a Soviet strategic bomber force growing in capability and ambition, and the nightmare scenario was always the same: a fleet of bombers crossing the pole, descending on Alaska and then the continental United States, delivering atomic devastation before American fighters could even scramble. The answer the Army settled on was the Nike missile system, a ground-to-air missile program that had originally been designed to bring down conventional aircraft, but which was rapidly evolving into something far more terrible. The Nike Ajax, deployed first, carried a conventional warhead and required extraordinary precision to intercept a target, but the Ajax was already being superseded in planners' minds by the Nike Hercules, a larger, faster missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, meaning that to destroy an incoming formation of Soviet bombers, the Army would simply detonate a nuclear weapon in the sky above American cities and absorb the consequences. The calculated logic of it was staggering. Better a small nuclear detonation at altitude over Anchorage than a large one on the ground. The people living below were never consulted about this arrangement. Between 1955 and 1959, the Army constructed an arc of Nike missile sites around Anchorage and Fairbanks that represented one of the most concentrated deployments of nuclear weapons on American soil outside of dedicated warhead storage facilities. The scale of the construction effort was immense. Each site required not just launch infrastructure, but integrated radar systems, underground launcher magazines capable of storing missiles in climate-controlled conditions, barracks for the soldiers who would live on-site in rotating shifts, diesel generators powerful enough to run everything independently of the local power grid, and hardened command bunkers designed to remain operational even if the surrounding area was struck by a nearby detonation. The Army spent hundreds of millions of dollars in 1950s currency constructing, staffing, and maintaining this network, and it did so under a veil of secrecy so complete that the official public position was essentially silence. There were installations, yes. Their precise armament and the nuclear nature of the Hercules warheads were classified at the highest levels. The construction crews who broke ground on these sites worked in conditions that tested human endurance. The Alaskan permafrost presented engineering challenges that had no easy solutions. Structures built directly on frozen ground risked destabilizing as heat from the buildings thawed the earth beneath them, causing foundations to shift and sink in the phenomenon engineers called frost heave. The Army's solution was to elevate many structures on piles driven deep into the permafrost, or to use elaborate insulation systems that kept the ground temperature from rising. Underground launcher magazines had to be engineered to remain dry and temperature stable year-round, which in an environment where the ground could reach minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit required systems of breathtaking complexity. Workers were told only what they needed to know. Many of the civilian contractors laying concrete and running electrical cable were given cover stories about radar installations and communication equipment. The missiles themselves arrived by military transport and were moved to the sites at night. Life inside the operational Nike sites was defined by a relentless, grinding alertness that wore men down over months of deployment. The soldiers assigned to these facilities lived in a state of permanent readiness that bordered on psychological torture. Alert drills could come at any hour. A klaxon would shatter the silence of the barracks at 3 a.m, and within minutes, crews were expected to have missiles elevated from their underground magazines, radar systems online, and targeting solutions calculated. The average time from alarm to launch-ready status was measured in minutes, not hours, because the flight time of Soviet bombers from the moment of radar detection to weapons release over Anchorage was itself only minutes. There was no margin. The men who rotated through these sites described a peculiar atmosphere, the terrible boredom of long watches punctuated by the heart-stopping shock of drills, and beneath everything, the constant awareness that the weapons they were maintaining could kill tens of thousands of people in a single detonation. But there was a problem that the official record did not acknowledge for decades. The Nike Hercules missiles stationed in Alaska carried nuclear warheads, and those warheads were stored in conditions that safety engineers back in the continental United States would have found alarming. Declassified safety inspection reports from the 1960s describe storage facilities where temperature control was inconsistent, where moisture intrusion created corrosion concerns on warhead housings, and where the security protocols around the physical warheads were, by the Army's own internal assessment, inadequate. One inspection report from a facility outside Fairbanks, partially redacted but released under a Freedom of Information Act request in 2019, noted that a warhead handling incident during a maintenance rotation had gone unreported up the chain of command for 11 days. The nature of the incident remains classified. What they discovered when they finally reviewed the full maintenance logs from Alaska's Nike network was even more disturbing. A pattern of small incidents, near misses, and protocol violations that had been quietly buried in unit records rather than escalated to Army command in Washington. The dark purpose of the Hercules warheads was not simply defense. Internal planning documents from the era reveal that Army commanders had developed targeting solutions not just for Soviet aircraft, but for specific approach corridors over Canadian territory, and that the detonation of a nuclear warhead at altitude over those corridors would have spread radioactive fallout across unpopulated wilderness, but also across Canadian towns and First Nations communities that had no knowledge of what was being planned in their airspace. The Army never informed the Canadian government of the full parameters of Alaska's Nike nuclear defense umbrella. Records tell a different story than the official Allied cooperation narrative of the Cold War. The proximity of the detonation zones to populated Alaskan communities was also a concern that was modeled, calculated, and then quietly filed away. The model suggested that a high-altitude nuclear detonation defending Anchorage could deposit measurable radioactive contamination on the city itself, depending on wind conditions. This finding did not result in the removal of the missiles. It resulted in the classification of the finding. The cover-up operated on multiple levels simultaneously. At the most basic level, the Army simply did not discuss the nuclear nature of the Hercules warheads with the public or with Alaskan state officials after statehood in 1959. At a more sophisticated level, the Army cultivated a public perception of the Nike sites as essentially benign radar and conventional missile installations, part of the fabric of Cold War preparedness that Americans had been conditioned to accept as normal. Local newspapers in Anchorage and Fairbanks occasionally published photographs of soldiers at Nike sites, showing the above-ground infrastructure and smiling servicemen, with captions that mentioned nothing about nuclear armament. Site commanders gave carefully scripted tours to local civic groups and school children, walking them through above-ground facilities and radar rooms, while the underground magazine levels where warheads were actually stored remained off the tour route, secured behind keypad-locked blast doors. What happened to Alaska's Nike missile sites after the Cold War's strategic logic evolved is a story of abandonment, concealment, and slow decay that raises questions which still do not have fully satisfying answers. The Army began decommissioning the Alaskan Nike network in the late 1970s, a process that accelerated through the 1980s as the threat calculus shifted from bombers to intercontinental ballistic missiles, against which the Nike system was useless. The official decommissioning process required the removal of all warheads and classified equipment, a process that was documented in summary form, but whose full records remain partially classified. Some sites were transferred to the state of Alaska or to local municipalities. Others were simply abandoned in place, their above-ground structures left to the Alaskan weather, while their underground levels were sealed with concrete poured into access shafts. The stated reason for the concrete sealing was to prevent accidents involving members of the public entering unstable underground structures. But researchers who have studied the decommissioning records note that the sealing was applied selectively and inconsistently. Some sites were thoroughly sealed, others were simply locked and left, and at least 2 sites in the Anchorage area have underground access points that were sealed with materials that have since deteriorated. Modern visitors to the former Nike sites in Alaska describe experiences that range from melancholy to genuinely unsettling. Fort Richardson's former Nike battery, now part of Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, is maintained as a historical site and open for occasional public tours, a rare exception to the general pattern of closure and decay. But the sites outside the base perimeter tell a different story. Hikers and urban explorers who have documented visits to former Nike Site Point Woronzof and Site Summit above Anchorage report finding above-ground structures in advanced states of collapse, rusting machinery half buried in vegetation, and concrete blast walls still standing in configurations whose purpose is not immediately obvious. At Site Summit, accessible via a trail above the Glen Alps parking area, the concrete infrastructure is visible and substantial. Launch pad foundations, equipment building slabs, and the distinctive geometry of radar emplacements. Local residents report that on certain nights, equipment malfunctions at the cellular towers now occupying parts of former Nike infrastructure produce interference patterns that older Anchorage residents describe with an uneasy familiarity. A low electromagnetic hum that the generation who grew up near these sites remember from childhood. Whether this is coincidence, folklore, or something more substantive, no official investigation has been conducted. What Alaska's Nike nuclear missile sites leave behind is not simply a question of environmental contamination, though that question has its own troubling dimensions. The Army's cleanup of petroleum products and battery acid from former Nike sites has been ongoing for decades, and soil sampling at several locations has returned results that regulators describe as requiring continued monitoring. The deeper legacy is something more difficult to articulate. For more than 20 years, the United States government maintained nuclear weapons in the immediate vicinity of American civilian communities in Alaska without the meaningful knowledge or consent of those communities. The soldiers who operated those weapons lived with a stress load that has only recently begun to be studied seriously by Veterans Affairs researchers. The near misses and protocol violations that were buried in unit records for decades represent a history of nuclear risk that the public was deliberately excluded from understanding. We know about the Nike sites of Alaska today because enough records survived, enough veterans spoke, and enough researchers pressed hard enough against the wall of classification to get fragments of the truth into the light. But the pattern of concealment that surrounded these sites was not unique to Alaska. It was policy. It was doctrine. And the question that those rusting concrete pads in the spruce forests above Anchorage ask of anyone willing to stand among them is simple and vertiginous. If this is what they finally told us about, what are the things they still haven't? The echoes of the Cold War are not finished sounding in Alaska. They are simply waiting in the permafrost, behind poured concrete, inside classification stamps that have not yet been lifted. If the hidden history of nuclear secrets and Cold War installations is the kind of story that keeps you awake at night, the kind that makes you look differently at the landscape around you, then subscribe. Because the next chapter of what was buried beneath American soil is one you will not want to miss.